Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Flip in the Barrel podcast. We are here at the Digital Wildcatter Studio in Houston, Texas. Shout out to Collide. If you want to join their community, go to www.collide.io and sign up to be part of their community, which is an oil and gas really sharing platform where you not only expand your network, but you also get to learn and share your knowledge. So shout out to Collide again. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing Tim Latimer. He is the CEO of Fervo Energy, the coolest, I'll say, and young and exciting geothermal company in the U.S. And so, Tim, thank you for being here today. We're super excited to hear from a founder, a young person in oil and gas that's, not going the same direction as everybody else and just bringing new technology into our industry. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Tim, you broke some amazing news when we first opened the podcast, when we were just in here talking, chatting. You are a recent dad, so congrats on that. That's
Thank
amazing. And we were also just kind of catching up on where you're from, and I think it's amazing. You're born and raised in Texas. Would love to hear about your upbringing here, and if you were aware of oil and gas at such a young age, being in Houston, being around. I know you lived in a smaller subset in Texas, but tell us about life growing up, your dad, your mom, any of those monumental, moments.
Yeah. So born in Houston. Actually, it was funny. I realized in the medical center when we were there for my son's birth 6 weeks ago, that we were half a block away from where I was born. So it was very much a full circle moment. But then ended up having a little bit of a different experience. My dad semi-retired when I was in kindergarten, and we moved back to my dad's hometown, which is Riesel, Texas, which is a town of about 900 people in central Texas. And so that was my upbringing in a very small town Texas experience, and definitely got to appreciate energy, because how can you not anywhere in Texas?
Mm-hmm.
It's not traditionally a big oil and gas area, but obviously it permeates everything we do in the state. And I think my real introduction to the energy industry was when I was in junior high. Actually, a company came in and proposed to build a new coal-fired power plant in Riesel, and kind of went through all the motions of getting the permits in and constructing the power plant. And it actually came online in 2011. And interestingly enough, my hometown is the location of the last new coal plant to ever be built in the United States.
Wow.
And I think that was my first real introduction to the energy industry, because I think a lot of folks, it's out of sight, out of mind. You don't really spend a lot of time thinking about energy unless the lights go out or you run out of gas or something. And it was interesting for me to be in this small town in Texas and see what would happen if a big power plant development came into our area. And so it ended up being about 4 miles from my childhood home was where they built the last coal plant ever built in America. And I think the interesting thing I took away from it was that there were obviously huge good and bad things that came with that kind of development. It brought in jobs and tax revenue that our city desperately needed, but then at the same time, it was something that produced a lot of noise and pollution in the area. And I think it was something that had a big impact on me from day one, to realize that, well, two things. One is that energy is not out of sight, out of mind. It's something that's here and present and impacts the way we live. And the other is to see that anytime you do an energy resource like that, there's going to be trade-offs. There's going to be good and bad. And it should be the job of the energy industry to maximize the good and minimize the bad. And I think that was a very important lesson for me early on.
Wow.
I don't think you would have known back then that you'd be leading a company in energy.
No, not at that time.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about just picking careers and what you wanted to do with your life. I remember when we first spoke, you mentioned you wanted to be a pro baseball player or maybe a lawyer. So you were kind of dabbling between those two paths, but then you ended up becoming an engineer and now a founder. So tell us a little bit about where did the baseball part come from, and then the lawyer, and then what actually ended up happening for you to actually go into engineering?
Yeah, I always loved baseball. Still my favorite sport. Excited that after being a lifelong fan, the Houston Astros are now 2 times World Series champs. So that's pretty good. I think by the time you're in high school, though, you realize that you can be really good at a sport, but that the difference between good and elite enough to go to the next level is a pretty big gap. And so I I think by the time I was about a junior in high school, I realized that my future may not be playing professional sports. And I started looking at other things to do. Being a lawyer was an interesting idea. I loved arguing with people, and so that seemed fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I did, mock trial actually in high school. And one thing I didn't like about it was that you got to argue with people, which sounded fun to me, but it was so rigorous and rules based. Like you could only do it in a very specific way.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's not really how my personality is wired. And at the same time, I started, I think, really taking note of, big projects, infrastructure projects like bridges and skyscrapers and new rocket companies and all sorts of those things. And I thought, what job lets you build those things rather than just kind of argue about stuff?
Yeah.
And that was sort of my introduction to engineering. So I think it was really born out of an idea that I love building things, and I love building big things, and I've been fascinated by that for a long time. And so what led me down the path of engineering was trying to find the career that would actually let me do that. So
Where did you end up going to school?
I went to the University of Tulsa,
And
Oh,
what
okay.
did you major in?
mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
So another very oil and gas
That's
spot.
right. Yeah. And so I started there in 2008, and it was kind of like, I remember people were just then at that point in time talking about like, hey, there's this big thing called the Eagleford that's starting to take off. And there were just new ideas around these unconventional shale basins. And I didn't think I was going to go into oil and gas at first. Ended up doing a bunch of different jobs. Probably my favorite internship is summer before my senior year of college, I was in Dearborn, Michigan, doing an engineering internship in Ford's research center. So doing like material science research, and I was fascinated by that work. But then I remember driving home the 20-hour road trip from Michigan and trying to think about what I wanted to do with my future. And I think two things weighed heavily on my mind. One is I wanted to try to be financially independent as soon as I could. So I was trying to find a good
High-paying job.
Yeah.
And the other one was that I wanted to be back in Texas. And I remember meeting with my advisor, and I said, hey, the automotive industry is fascinating, but I'm kind of solving for two criteria. I really want to get paid well, and I want to end up in Texas. And he kind of looked at me
That's
and
not
was like,
really.
have you ever heard of oil? And it was a fascinating time because it was fall of 11, and that was the point when people realized that the Eagleford and the Bakken and the Haynesville
People were
and all
hiring
these
left and
things
right.
Yeah, for
were
sure.
really taking off. And so I applied to a few places, ended up landing a job as a drilling engineer with BHP.
It's so incredible how things intertwine, because you were on this path, you were going to the Ford, you were probably well versed to do that job and to live in Michigan and do all of that. But it was just like this thing in your mind was like, no, like I want to live in Texas. I want to do this. So BHP, I find that really fascinating as well, because my same time, I was actually selling drill bits to all the BHP rigs in the Eagleford.
Yeah.
So probably on some of the rigs that you were maybe being
Probably
a
so.
drilling engineer for. Tell us, like, what was that transition like? Like, they said, hey, come work for us. Nothing, like, you didn't intern with any oil and gas companies before, so not really the same thing as working at Ford. So what was, like, your expectation versus, like, when you got there and you started working on it? How did you adjust, and what did you think?
It's a fascinating time to think about. I mean, this was 2012. I would say, like, in a boom and bust industry, 2012 was probably one of the boomiest of boom times that the U.S. oil and gas industry's ever experienced. And since I had never worked in oil and gas before, I didn't quite know what to expect. I showed up at BHP. I went through kind of their basic safety training course, and then I got my job assignment, and they said, yeah, you're going to be on a rig in South Texas. And I was like, and this was on the Friday of my first week, and I was like, oh, that's fantastic. Like, who's going to, what kind of training classes do I need to do? How am I going to get out there? And they were like, this is the rig location, be there by Sunday. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's how this is going to start.
Yeah.
And if you think about the rig count had skyrocketed then, every company was hiring, but there was just not enough people to go around to meet this boom demand. And my vivid memory showing up that day, first day on location, and the well site supervisor was sitting in, monitoring the screen in the office trailer like they usually do. And he looks at me as I open the door, having no idea what I'm doing. And he's like, "Oh, thank goodness my relief is here." And I was just like, "Oh, no, I'm just the junior engineer. I don't,
Yeah,
I'm
like,
not,
wait,
I'm not here to
I'm not
do
to
anything."
replace you. Yeah.
And he said, "Well, we've been short-staffed for a bit, so I haven't slept for a while. So I'm going to go take a nap." And he just sat me down in front of the screen and said, "If this squiggly line gets too far this way, come wake me up. Otherwise, you're in charge." And that was my
That's
introduction
hilarious.
That's awesome.
to the oil and gas industry.
Like, if
And
anything
so-
flashes red, you
Yeah.
come wake me up.
Yeah.
And it was just trial by fire. And I think what I've learned in my career is that those moments where there's like, chaos and uncertainty, like if you're willing to rise to the occasion, you can learn
Mm-hmm.
super fast. So I just kind of embraced it and tried to take on as much responsibility as I could. And, that was my introduction to the oil field.
Wow.
I love it.
What was your rotation like? Like, how long were you out there for?
We did like kind of a 2 week in the field and then a week in the office to try to do engineering training things. And then allegedly we would get a week off after that.
Allegedly. Yeah, like
allegedly.
whenever they let you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about how geothermal kind of came to be for you, because I remember you mentioning it. You kind of got exposed a little bit to it with BHP, and then you thought a lot about it. You did some research. Tell us a little bit about that. And then you actually went to BHP and told them your amazing
right.
idea that they shut down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there were a lot of things about the oil and gas industry that I really liked, like the fact that it was fast paced. You work with brilliant people who care passionately about their jobs. But I'd already, if you think back to that early coal plant experience, like already when I was starting that career, I was thinking about, coming to work every day and being really passionate about the impact we were having on energy access and affordability and reliability. But I was also thinking about that other part of the equation, like what's the environmental impact and what is the emissions impact and what does this mean for the long term? And so I was kind of keeping my eyes open for other opportunities already, back when I was starting out. And I, solar was really starting to take off then, and wind was starting to take off then, and those things looked exciting. But I was just thinking, I've now spent years learning how to drill wells. So like, how does a drilling engineer go into one of those career paths and be additive? And so it didn't really seem like the right fit for me. And then serendipitously, one of the things that's interesting about the Eagleford is the reservoir temperature is a lot higher than a lot of other onshore U.S. oil and gas fields. And so we were having a lot of motor and MWD failures that we thought were directly related to the high temperatures. So like one of my first jobs when I was working in the field was, what do we need to do? Can we change our fluid system? Do we need to get different motors? Are there better MWD tools? And so I'm researching opportunities for high temperature drilling, and every paper comes back as from this field called geothermal. And I'd never heard of geothermal before. And so I'm like, what are people doing high temperature for this geothermal thing? And then I learned about geothermal, which is basically, you drill into hot rock somewhere in the earth and you produce steam instead of oil and gas. You can use that steam to generate electricity. So, uses the same drilling skills that I developed in the field, produces energy, which is very important to me, but then also does so in a carbon-free, environmentally sustainable way. And I was like, wow, this is quite the life hack. I could be a drilling engineer and do it for kind of a clean energy resource. And so I got really excited about that. And then the pivotal moment for me was that I read this report that had been commissioned in 2006. It's called the MIT Future of Geothermal Energy Report, and basically described a problem that sounded a lot like what I was doing in oil and gas, which was that there's no shortage of hot rock geology in the world, but the places where you could get high productive flow rates out of the reservoir were really limited because a lot of the hot rock was found in tight, impermeable formations. And the conclusion of this paper was basically, if we could just figure out how to cost effectively get high flow rates out of low permeability formations, this could be a technology that was ubiquitous and could be global, worldwide. And I'm sitting on a drilling rig in South Texas in the Eagleford where the combination of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling technology had just done that exact thing. Unlocked a resource where there were tons of hydrocarbons, but it was too tight to flow commercially naturally. And I just thought it was the most obvious idea in the world. If the whole limitation on geothermal was getting high flow rates out of these tight formations, we just solved that problem in oil and gas. And that's where I just got captivated by the idea.
How old were you?
24, 25
my
probably.
gosh.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you just been on the rig for
A few years.
yeah, just a few years.
Exactly.
So you've been at BHP. So how long were you at BHP when you came to them with the idea?
About 2 years.
Okay, so 2 years in, you're
yeah.
very bold. You're like, hey,
Oh my gosh.
I have this like you. Why have we not thought
Right.
of this? Like, what
yeah.
happened?
Did they look
Yeah.
at you
Well,
like
I
you were
sort of
crazy or what?
went and talked to my manager and other folks in the organization, and BHP has always been very, I'd say, outspoken about their climate
Yeah,
commitments
I
and their
remember.
sustainability goals. And so I was like, hey, y'all are a company that drills wells. You care a lot about sustainability goals. Like, this is the
Perfect recipe.
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
you. And I was sort of told in as many words that it's not the job of kind of a junior engineer to try to steer corporate strategy. And I
Oh
was
my
like, okay,
gosh.
well, that sounds good. And so, long story short, I realized that was not going to be the long-term home
Yeah.
for me. And I could not get the idea out of my head that, like, we could apply these new technologies to geothermal. And I just made the decision, if the company I'm working at's not going to do it, then I'm going to leave that company.
Okay, so
Wow.
like that's a pivotal moment right there. Like, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
leave that company. How were you thinking about? Okay, I'm gonna leave a very stable job, one that obviously you were doing well at, and making good money, especially if you were still in the field at this time, making good money. And you're like, I'm just gonna leave it behind, and I'm just gonna go on this thing, this journey. What about funds? Like, what about money? What about
Yeah.
like what? How did you
So that was
make it work?
the initial challenge. Like, I kind of tell people sometimes I'm a reluctant entrepreneur. First, I tried to get the company I worked at to do this idea. And then my next thought was, this is such an obvious idea. Like, I'll
Mhm.
just go find the existing geothermal companies that surely are
Yeah.
adopting all this new technology already. And so I just sort of scoured every company I could find and cold called and talked to people. And there was, one moment when I was describing to somebody how I thought we should drill horizontally to access more geothermal resources. And the person at this geothermal company I talked to was like, you can't drill horizontally. And I was like, again, I personally drilled dozens of wells in the Eagle Ford.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
industry had drilled tens of thousands
Yeah.
of wells at this point horizontally. And it clicked for me that these industries, even though they both
weren't
revolve
talking.
around
Mm-hmm.
drilling, were so disconnected that people in
Wow.
geothermal, some of them didn't even know that horizontal drilling was possible. And
Wow.
and so I eventually said, all right, well, if I'm not going to, if I can't change my company's mind, and if the existing incumbents aren't the ones that are going to, adopt this new technology, I thought, how can I do this? And the answer is to start a company to do
Yep.
it. And quickly, when I was researching starting a company, I realized that, like, all those stories about, people bootstrapping a company in their garage
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and everything, those work when you're, like, tinkering around with some software technology. But
Not
if
to
your
drill a
concept
well.
is to
Yeah.
drill a bunch of wells the way nobody's ever done it before and
Yeah.
spend tens of millions of dollars, and then, like, maybe if it works, it produces electricity. Like, you're not going to bootstrap that in your garage. And
No,
so,
you don't need funding.
yeah.
Like, you need real money to.
Wow.
and so the next step for me was where does money come from for crazy ideas? And the thing that kept popping up in my research was Stanford. So I decided I was going to go to business school, and I wrote my application essay. This would have been in late 2014 about how I wanted to go to Stanford. I wanted to use my time there to learn how to build a business so that I could take transformational breakthrough drilling technology from oil and gas and transform the geothermal industry with it. And thankfully, they accepted me, and I headed off to campus
Wow.
that fall.
Wow.
That is just crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Side note, what did your family, friends, were they like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, what was the feedback from the
Yeah.
general public? Because I assume when people come up with such crazy ideas, you don't get the
Yeah.
claps and the supports that I think entrepreneurs need in those in early stages. They're like,
Yeah.
just go back to the stable job. You're not going
Yeah.
to change the world. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. I remember talking to some family members and kind of the feedback being, you have a good job right now.
Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah. And I think that was part of it. And honestly, I think that it was just, every entrepreneur has to have something that motivates them. And I think that kind of early passion I had for energy and the environment was motivating for me. But maybe even more so than that, it just bothered me, I think, at my core.
Yeah, like you were
that
really.
these were
All these,
technologies that were proven
yeah.
in terms of how you could drill new wells, and that I would just talk to people about applying it to geothermal and wouldn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I was just totally transfixed on this idea of like, what if this would work, but then we didn't try it? And then I was like, if I don't start this company, will society ever actually try this thing? And like, what if there was this near miss of a technology that could transform the world, and it just always sat just on the other side of somebody actually taking the conviction to tinker with it? And I think that was kind of the driving principle for me for years in getting it done.
So tell me, Stanford says yes, come do this here.
Yeah.
But that doesn't give you the funding to like do millions of So what, like, where that was just a stepping stone to get
a stepping stone, and I got a reputation quickly as the student in class at Stanford that, like, anytime there would be an opportunity to ask a question or do a class project, I was like, I can't tell you how many times it was like, okay, and then the class project, you've got to do this, this, and this. And I said, I've got a great idea. What if our class project was, we're going to start a geothermal company that uses new drilling technology? And I repeated that through like 8 different classes, which helped me get so much traction on it. And I think one of the pivotal moments for me was, even at Stanford, I found it challenging a little bit, because so much of the venture capital ecosystem around Stanford is software based, right? Which is totally different challenge from hardware. That it took a little bit to kind of find my people. But then my second year there, I was able to take a class that was called Stanford Climate Ventures, and it was intentionally, the teaching team brought in a very different curriculum, because they were like, look, a lot of the rules around, like, I'm going to start an app and do this and bootstrap it in my garage don't work if you have to like develop a new chemical process or a new battery chemistry or, you know, a new way of you name it. And so what are the what are the startup tools that actually work for an innovative hardware solution? And you know, that class, you know, went through, developed a pitch deck, and in the summer of the end of the year in 2017, I, you know, gave our final pitch, and 2 of the professors there, the adjunct lecturers there, who were VCs in their day job and then taught this class on the side, pulled me aside afterward. Dave Danielson, who's a managing director at Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and then Joel Moxley, who's a managing director at Echelon Capital. And they said, hey, is this a class project for you or something you're serious about? And I said, it's something I'm serious about. And they said, well, we like the story. Like, we should talk.
Awesome.
And so I sort of got that seed funding. So the whole thesis on, like, I don't know how to raise capital, but let me go put myself in this ecosystem to figure it out, paid off, because those two folks stepped up and they became our first funders.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really cool is what Stanford did is it set you up for that grind of, I have this idea. I'm going to keep pitching this idea in this environment. And then it was, now you get the opportunity to make the pitch deck, which is really important when it comes to any sort of idea or trying to like get people convinced. It's a lot easier when you've got some material or something to like, so your message is like consistent. And then, you know, it skyrocketed you into where you're at. Yeah. So the seed round, tell me about that, because you got these 2 guys, they're like, we're interested. What happens next? Yeah,
so ended up also attracting some great advisors, my co-founder at this point in time. So Jack Norback was wrapping up his PhD at Stanford in their geothermal reservoir program, and just happened to have done a lot of his research on, you know, what happens if you were to use horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing to improve geothermal. So I was like, we should be on a team.
Yeah.
And we hit it off, and so we decided to launch the company in it was April of 2018. We closed $600,000 between Breakthrough and Echelon and a couple other investors. And we were not too far beyond just like some ideas and a pitch deck at that point in time. And so we sort of made a commitment to those investors that we were going to come back to you with essentially 2 things. One was going to be a site that we were going to go trial this at, and we were going to get the permits to do it. And the other was going to be actual like techno-economic analysis built on reservoir modeling to show that, you know, not only could this be done, but we could do it at a cost structure and revenue profile that makes a strong financial return. And so we knocked out both those things, and we came back about a year later and raised a $10 million Series A with the idea of doing our first ever field trial. And so we were able to use those funds to complete that work in 2020.
So the $600,000 that you originally had invested, did that cover the two things that you had to come back with, or like did you need more money than the 600?
It covered it, but only for that short period of time. Because
Yeah.
600,000, it was a funny amount of money. It was enough to like pay payroll and
Yeah.
collect the software licenses we needed to. But obviously, you're not going to mobilize anything to the field with that
No.
amount of
Yeah.
money. And so we basically got everything ready. All of the financial approvals, all the permits we needed, all of the contracts we needed, all the supply chain, and essentially like went to investors with that package with like, hey, look, the next step here is to do a field trial.
And
We've
this, we
got
need money.
Everything
Yeah.
figured
Like,
out. As soon as you give us money, we can mobilize and prove that this works. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was the first field?
Yeah.
Like,
So the first idea we had was there was a couple things that we kind of developed in the early days. The first is that a lot of what we were proposing to do. So geothermal, by the way, I should say, it works. Just the quick primer on geothermal. You drill wells into hot rock. You drill sets of injection wells and production wells. You pump cold water down the injection wells. It flows across the reservoir, comes back up production wells as hot water, and you can use that to generate electricity. And so, again, if it's permeable, if you have Iceland's geology and stuff naturally flows, you've got a great ubiquitous energy resource. If it's impermeable, you got dry holes. And so when we looked at this, though, we said that our capital is precious. It's really hard to raise this money. So let's only spend it on things that actually move the needle on validating the technology. And we realized that as we talked to investors, nobody doubted that the power plant side would work, right? That geothermal's been around for 50 years.
Yeah.
It was just a question on if the new drilling technology would work. And so rather than start our own project from scratch, what we did is we looked at every geothermal power plant in the United States and said, where's there a power plant that actually had too many dry holes? So their power plant capacity is bigger than the steam that's flowing into those wells. And so that was the first thing, is we said, we don't want to do our own greenfield project. Let's go find a partner where we can drill wells
and just feed it to them.
and feed it to them. Because we didn't need to prove that power plants work. We just needed to prove that our drilling methods would work. And so we ended up selecting a site in northern Nevada called the Blue Mountain Power Plant. It had been developed and put online in 2009. And by the time we started looking at it about a decade later, it was in that classic problem of like, it was built to be 40 megawatts, but wasn't quite producing enough. And so we were able to strike a deal with the plant operator where we said, look, we'll take all the risk. We'll drill a few new wells on your site. And if we happen to make, geothermal steam with this technology, we'll feed it into the plant. You just compensate us for the uplift. And if not, it's our capital risk.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. And so that's how we cited the first location.
Was the first one successful?
It was.
Okay.
Many twists and turns along the way,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
but it was really important to us. Around this time, we were also starting to gain a lot of commercial traction. So we did kind of a first, downhole testing in 2020. That work was successful. Went back into the market in 2021. We raised about 50 million more in a Series B round with the goal of actually like drilling wells and validating this. So we drilled a vertical monitoring well, a horizontal injection well, and a horizontal production well. And one of the things that we were able to do at the time as well, if you think about the recipe you need to raise capital and get a startup off the ground, a functional technology is only half the picture. You also have to prove that you have a viable commercial traction and business model. And around that time, Google had launched a really important initiative that they called their 24/7 carbon-free energy initiative. So if you think about Google's sustainability history, going all the way back to like the late 2000s, they said we're going to be 100% renewable energy from our electricity procurement. And they actually met that goal in 2018. But usually the way people define 100% renewable energy, it's an annual average. So what they basically would do is people would buy enough solar and wind that on average over the year, it equals the amount of energy you use. So it's more of an accounting exercise than a actual physical phenomenon. And Google said, hey, we set that goal, we met it early. What's the next level of ambition we should have? And so they launched something about 24/7 carbon-free energy, they called it, which is like, let's actually try to power our operations every hour of the year.
Wow.
And the assessment they said is that, wind and solar will play a role in this, but clearly like they can't do the job on their own. So we're going to scout for new technologies. And so we connected with Google because they made this announcement, and they actually stepped in and became our development partner and kind of first customer for that project.
Oh, cool.
So we had everything that we needed, a tech that worked, a customer that was passionate about it.
Yeah.
With money.
With money.
With money.
Google has a little bit of that.
Google.
And so many different technical twists and turns. Drilling horizontal wells in granite at high temperature is not easy. Running the program to create fractures in granite, which is a very different rock than shale, also not easy. All kinds of things that we learned along the way.
Wow.
But ultimately, by October of 2023, we brought the first production well online and started producing new electricity from this facility
Wow.
on that day. And that was sort of like the day we went from
an idea, hopefully it works, to
like,
execution.
This is a real technology. And
Wow.
we showed that horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, more sophisticated technology around everything from fiber optic sensing to drilling automation could deliver a differentiated result in different geologies that were previously unsuccessful. Because remember, we were at this site because they tried to do step-out programs and found dry holes. So the thing that was fascinating about this site is we drilled this well right in between a set of failed wells that were dry holes. And so it was the perfect like-for-like demonstration of like, we could go find hot rock that previously would have been considered dry holes, drill our wells,
and produce
energy from
Yeah.
it.
So question on the drilling side, is it very similar to what you were drilling in South Texas? Like same like big H&P, Patterson, Neighbors rig?
Exactly.
What do you, like what RSS did you use? Like is it all like the same stuff as oil and gas?
Yes. And that actually is something that's a little bit new to Fervo. And this is something that I'm glad you asked the question because we're passionate about this as well. When I started working in the Eagle Ford, like the first rig I ever worked on was an H&P Flex 3 rig. And so like I got used to like software and automation and sophistication just being embedded into the drilling process. Like that's how the oil and gas delivers results. And then I went and visited my first geothermal site. And the rig that I visited was older than me. It was a Kelly rig. There was zero software automation in the process at all. And it just like, I was flabbergasted by it. And it was funny. I asked somebody from the company, like, hey, why is the geothermal industry using this outdated equipment? And they were like, oh, well, we can't afford the rigs that oil and gas uses. And it totally confused me because I was like, do y'all think oil and gas is using expensive rigs like for charity? Or, because they want to share the wealth? And then no, they're using high performing rigs because if you have the right people and equipment on an operation, you're going to deliver a result that's differentiated. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And so I wanted to have a total paradigm shift of how people in geothermal thought about field development. Like we didn't want to, trip over dollars to pick up pennies, which is what I thought the industry was doing. And so I was adamant that our first operation was going to be with an H&P Flex 3 rig. Like that's what I drilled on oil and gas. We want to bring that level of technology and sophistication to the geothermal sector. And this is where all the steps along the way, from me going to the University of Tulsa for college, so I knew a bunch of people that worked for H&P, to working in the oil and gas industry for a while. As we worked with H&P and actually struck a deal where they came out and drilled our first wells. They actually became an investor in Fervo.
Wow.
And it was the first time they had actually drilled geothermal wells as well. And so what we were ultimately able to do, and I can talk more about our drilling results later on, is prove that over learning the iteration of a few wells, we were able to just blow out of the water anything that the geothermal industry had ever done from a drilling performance standpoint before. And I think it was because we were so insistent on like actually bringing
like the nice
oil and gas
real technology
to the sector.
To it.
That's so cool.
That's really cool.
How did nobody see this? Like, duh.
I don't know.
So tell us, like, over the years, it's been, I think you said 8 years now, from the start of Fervo. What has been the most challenging for you? Is it like a people standpoint? Is it like the funding? What would you say, like, for those looking to start a company, like some tricks that maybe you learned through the 8 years?
I think that what I would say is the most challenging thing is, when we first started the company, people gave us advice like, oh, you don't want to be capital intensive. Don't develop the products yourself. Just develop a technology package or a software package and sell that to somebody. And I got that feedback from so many investors. And I kept saying, okay, sell it to who?
Yeah.
You know, the tiny geothermal companies that don't have any capital. And so like, they're not gonna be able to afford to spend money on this anyway. Or the oil and gas companies who are still focused on their core assets. They're not paying attention to this. And so we sort of made the decision early on that we were going to be the developer. Like we were going to get all the permits for the project. We were going to lease all the land. We're going to manage all the contracts. We're going to make all the engineering decisions. And it's actually like a really hard thing to do. And most like tech companies, we started out, you know, with a technology idea, not an idea to be a developer. You can find almost no examples of companies successfully kind of pivoting from like, here's a core new technology to like, well, we're just going to build the projects ourselves. And the reason for that is the nature of development is just totally unforgiving. And I think that's one of the things that I try to impart to people on this is that like, if you've got a software thing and you launch it and you're making 90% gross margin on it and it's buggy, so it's down for a few days, but you fix it, like, you know, you're going to survive that. You can be sort of half right and make a lot of money on a software startup. If we have a project and we've got like the permits in place for it and the team in place for it and the customer lined up, you know, but we didn't realize that power transformers have a 5-year lead time and you can't connect to the grid unless you have a power transformer. Like no one says, hey, you got 90% of the way there. So like, good job.
Good job. Yeah. Here's my
You have to be 100% right. And for a startup that's doing it for the first time, that's I think the hardest thing is I think you think about what we've done over the span of the 8 years we've been in business. Like we've made plenty of mistakes and we've had to come back and recover from them. But it's just you have to be on all the time. Every day there's a new challenge that like if you don't solve this challenge, the project doesn't get done. And to do that while simultaneously convincing investors that it's a good idea, tinkering with the technology because it's early in its deployment phase and everything. I think it's not I don't know, it's a bit of a non-answer because you asked me what's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
I'd say the hardest thing is that just your margin for error is nothing. And if you're not on every single day, the project goes sideways.
With a lot of pressure.
A lot of
from
pressure.
employees, investors, all of that. I guess the last question we have for you is really on team and building really good teams because that's what's going to make Fervo successful to continue your vision and your goals. With how you left BHP so really that's kind of what you have in terms of like corporate company culture vibes right after school. How were you able to find other like-minded individuals like yourself that are like pushing the boundaries in other, you know, oil and gas companies that want to come over? I've met some of your team. They're young, they're cool, they think differently, but that's hard to find because at the end of the day, also people don't want to take a big risk to go to a startup when they're like, mom and dad at these big oil companies are just going to take care of me for the next 20 to 30 years. So there's also that convincing on this may not work, but come and learn from us. And as exciting as that is hard for people to take that risk. People are risk adverse.
I think that's right. I'm glad the final question is on team because I think that's kind of the most important thing for a lot of startups. Like it's a challenging journey for founders to make sometimes because you go from, I was describing this to somebody the other day, like you essentially go from a startup to being like the quarterback to being the coach to being the general manager over time. Like in the beginning, you're in the weeds and you're making all the calls and you're the one doing the plays. But then pretty soon the work becomes big enough that you're like, okay, I've got to like, you know, put people in the right place and call the right plays, but I can't be in all the action. And then you get even bigger and your job isn't even like calling the plays. It's like thinking on a multi-year time frame to think about what are the pieces I need at the table to make this work. And that's a difficult transition to make, but ultimately startups fail all the time because the founders can't grow with the role, right? And so we didn't want to make that mistake. And I knew that if I was going to entrust people to do the work, to be the new quarterback, to be the new person on the field, like they had to be the best people. And I think Fervo is a really fascinating case in our ability to attract talent. Our executive team is incredible, and it's a lot of folks like you described. They're mid-career people who've proven that they're the best at what they do and are ready for that next challenge. And their way to our door is all different. Like there's a lot of people who started their career in oil and gas who are very passionate about climate and sustainability, and they see what I saw. And it's like, this is a role where I can apply those skills in a new way for a new industry. You know, that's one way people come into the door. The other way people come in the door is like, those sort of glory days of wildcatting and oil and gas and like pushing the frontier of a new technology, it only comes every so often, right? And sometimes I tell people that geothermal today is a lot like, imagine you were working in shale and it's like 2003. Like
Yeah.
people are still figuring it out.
Yeah.
There's still a huge land rush in West Texas and northern Louisiana and you name it, because the industry's not settled yet. It's still in that growth mode. And like, come join, like we're there. Like a lot of times, like I have enormous respect from the oil and gas industry, but what a lot of the oil and gas industry is doing today is, you know, we're drilling our 5,000th well in the Permian, and can we make it a little bit better
Yeah.
than the last time? And that's important work, but it's a totally different part of the business evolution cycle than where we are right now, which is like we're drilling our 10th well ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are so many things that we
And so many
don't
different things you can
know
improve
yet.
on. There's so much
Yeah.
opportunity for those coming into your team to be
And-
able to work on
exactly.
big things.
And those are the people who do really well at Fervo. People who like proven their chops, whether it's technically or operationally or through their commercial skills in other roles, but see this as like, I want to get on the ground floor of like the next grand challenge. And that's Fervo. And so we've attracted just enormously talented people across the board. And the biggest factor in our success by far is the fact that we've like recruited for all those positions on the field, where we've got just the best folks who are all rowing in the same direction to take Fervo to the next level.
I
So,
love it. How many
yeah.
people are in your team now?
We have 150 employees now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a big growth.
That's a
Yeah.
big group from
Yeah.
for 8 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We've come a long way. My co-founder Jack and I, we started the company. We actually were really fortunate to get a research fellowship from an organization called Activate that let us be at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So while we were doing a lot of this reservoir modeling, we were doing it in a national lab, and we joke sometimes like, we started the company, the two of us shared a cubicle together
Yeah.
in like a bank of postdocs at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and now we're
That's amazing.
now we're here. So
I love it. Your
That's
story
amazing.
is so
I love
cool.
it. Yeah.
Like,
it's been a long time
BHP,
since we've had
yeah.
such a cool founder story like
Drilling
yours.
engineer to like, hey, I have this really great idea. Somebody listen to me. Okay, you're not gonna listen to me. Let me just go and figure it out. To then getting the funding, getting the money, and being true to what, like, you from the very beginning knew exactly what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, this is what I want to do, and I'm passionate
Yeah.
about it. And I think it's super cool. It's really inspiring. You're super young as well, which is like awesome. I think that's so cool to do things like so early on when you figure out what you want to do, and then you're like, I'm gonna go for it. And you just became a dad, so I don't think it gets much better than
Yeah.
that. So
No, and I think like the biggest takeaway for me or people I think listening is if you are a big company and you've got young talent, no matter how young they are, whether they've just been there for a year, 6 months, like listen, because I get it. There's that stigma of like, what do you guys know? You're young, you're dumb, we're smarter than you. And that's why these amazing other companies go out and start.
Yeah.
And so if there's like one lesson I think for leaders who are listening to this is like, pay attention to those young people that are crazy enough to think that they're going to change the world, because they are, and you could have been part of that success if you just listened.
Yeah.
So I love it. Thank you so much for
well, I'm
coming on
glad
the
they
podcast.
didn't listen, because now he's here today. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all.
Yeah.
This has been awesome.
thanks,
Yeah.
Tim. And thanks for everybody who tuned into this episode. Please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Find us on www.themoonbarrel.com. We also have 2 other podcasts, Energy If You Know, You Know, and Massiel Diez, which is a Spanish podcast really focused on Latin America. So please tune into that. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.